Oh, that's TBOATI in 2 words. Intelligent and nice. It's opposite day.
Lawyerstein, you tell these people that it's not opposite day.
It's not opposite day.
Thank you.
Hello friends, and welcome back to ReddX, your source for the freshest daily Reddit content anywhere on the internet. Promise, swearsies, it's just a fact, and it's totally science. Go ahead and look it up. Today we're jumping into r/Tales of Neckbeards. Yes, indeed, continuing the saga of the Beard of 1,000 Irritations. This is a super beefy post. Yes, indeed. Estimated reading time about 22 minutes. So I know that there's some stuff that is going to go down. If nothing else, then we'll learn a little bit more about this beard and his extremely small sci-fi universe, at least judging from the title. If you've missed the first parts, you can go ahead and check out those links in the description. And without any further delay, I suppose we'll get some plugs and disclaimers out of the way, and then we'll jump into some hardcore Tales of Neckbeard cringe. The Beard of 1,000 Irritations, the smallest sci-fi universe. Hi everyone, and welcome to part 5 of my experiences with the Beard of 1,000 Irritations, or TBOATI for short. If you found this part of the series but want to start from the beginning, here's part 1, and also, again, in the description. TBOATI's a sci-fi fan working on his own original world, and has been hiring me, a writing coach, to help him with his world building development and get his story written and posted online. This has been pretty frustrating at times, and I'm letting off steam by writing about this. I've changed a few details to protect both the innocent and the bearded. Law and order. Here's our cast list. OP, yep, she's in here. The Beard of 1,000 Irritations, doesn't look like the description's changed there either. And we've got Jay. We talked about his girlfriend Emily in the last post, but I suppose she doesn't appear much in this one. I suppose maybe she broke up with him. Here's hoping. I think it's worth talking in more detail about TBOATI's sci-fi world. It's not that his idea is bad. It's got a good premise, but I don't think he uses it as well as he could for a few different reasons. One, the main character of the story he wants to write using this world is basically just a self-insert, and he completely lacks any self-awareness. 2, as we established in the previous part of this series, he's kinda hormone-addled, so he wants to shoehorn sex into this world. You don't need to write your own book series to do that, man. You sit down, watch some Star Wars, watch Captain Kirk banging out some aliens. 3, he's got a laser focus on certain parts of the world, and it can be hard for him to divert his attention anywhere else, even if it will help him develop the bits that he's interested in. 4, his creativity much of the time amounts to not much more than naming things, places, species, etc. I mean, that's something that a random word generator could do, isn't it? You gotta flesh it out in order for it to be at all interesting. But OP knows that. I'm talking mostly to TBOATI. I hope you're watching this, TBOATI. You know he's not. Or if he is, he's lacking the self-awareness to realize that it's him that's being talked about. I want to give you a quick reminder of what his world is like. It's a sci-fi dystopia. The focus is a planet whose land masses are divided into 7 super states, and the culture of each one is based on one of the 7 deadly sins. He has a few species, none of which are well developed, and one of which is essentially just humans. And most of his world building is around the theme of socioeconomics, particularly the trials and troubles of the lower working classes and the monstrous indulgence and callousness of the upper classes. So yeah, basically run-of-the-mill standard fare. Not a whole lot interesting there. So where to start? I should probably start as close to the chronological beginning of his world as I can. See, the world is dystopian because there was a world war prior to the current day, where the soldiers were robots, and they did their job a little too well, so almost all life on the planet died. It slowly began to recover, But for a long time, there were just a few disparate pockets of life. Then a race of super intelligent aliens got involved, helped the world recover, and exploited the ever-living shit out of the world as they did. In the current days, the world is depleted, and its people mostly unhappy because of the aliens' ongoing exploitation of their world. Most of the world's population has no idea that the aliens even exist. Are the aliens lizard people, perchance? Are you trying to tell us something? All of that's a fine story and setting in and of itself, but then we started working on one of his species. I asked TBOATI what their culture was like to encourage him to think about the exoticism of the world that he was creating. The people he was most interested in may have been impoverished, but that didn't mean that they lacked their own customs. Cultures tend to depend on a species' history, so this was a time when we needed to take a look at something other than his world's socioeconomics for a change. What art did they like to make? What art could they make with the materials available? What technology did they have available left over from the past era? What was the religion of the previous civilization like? And if it was integrated into the current day, why and how? What was their daily meal structure like and why? All of this was likely to inform the current culture. Well, those are all pretty legitimate questions. I should be taking notes on this. This is like a free lesson in itself. Thanks, OP. TBOATI answered much of this with, the aliens don't care what the culture's like. And he just seemed happy to leave it at that. He wasn't terribly communicative about any of this, and I think he just wanted to get it over with so he could get back to the areas that he was interested in, which were pretty much already covered. Even if the aliens don't care what the culture's like, a good book would flesh that out, regardless of their level of interest. It's the planet they're living on, dude. Please do something with it. This is where that licking a tree and expecting maple syrup factor comes back in. On the one hand, he'd have quite liked to fill all the world with boring details from real-world Earth, but at the same time, he wanted a captivatingly alien world. He cited some particularly exotic sci-fi movies as examples of the kind of setting that he wanted. I pointed out that the pre-war world would probably be worth focusing on. There had to be heaps of old books, technology, architecture, and so on strewn around the world, which would probably influence the cultures of his world in the current day. He was shocked to realize that his world had existed before the World War. It genuinely hadn't occurred to him that there would have been a thriving culture before the war, not just a population living in a cultural vacuum waiting to be destroyed by robots. Classic. Imagine if the Fallout games did that. They're just like, yeah, there's nothing. There was nothing that existed before the war. The Big Bang, it was just an artillery shell. Then there was the self-insert. TBOATI wanted to write a story in this universe that followed the life of one individual, who I'll call Mallory, who overcomes the influence of the aliens and develops special powers. Ooh. I worked with TBOATI to figure out the character's life history. To work that out, I'd need to know what Mallory's schooling was like, what sort of stimulation he got while growing up, whether he had a mom or a dad, or whether the standard family unit worked differently in his culture, and all sorts of other influencing factors. We worked through a lot of this, but progress was slow because we were trying to reverse engineer a whole culture to figure Mallory out. And like I said before, TBOATI barely cared what the culture was. Unfortunately, his revelation about the previous culture existing still hadn't stirred his interest, and he didn't seem to put two and two together that people are a product of the culture they grow up in. That is so terrifyingly true. Every time I see somebody from California, I identify so heavily with them because they have that like relaxitude with a mishmash of overconfidence that I seem to have as well. And my wife too, growing up in the Philippines. She's extremely respectful, non-confrontational, but she also doesn't mince words with people that she trusts. So culture is definitely such an interesting thing to think about and study. Sorry, side tangent. Most of my customers love a foray into the cultures of their worlds, and there have been many times when I've asked a customer a cultural question that gets them excited about the new depths that they're discovering. TBOATI is not one of those customers. And yet, I'd be redundant if I didn't help TBOATI explore the world that Mallory lived in. TBOATI doesn't have to look into the culture of the world, of course not. But if he did want to look into the culture, why not just write Mallory in Earth by another name without me? Or at the very least, tell me clearly what he did want to work on and what he didn't. If you want a culturescape as different from real life as, say, the magic side of Harry Potter's universe, you can't really skimp on the detail. During one of our sessions, after we'd spent another few hours on Mallory by reverse engineering the world that he lived in, TBOATI went into a sort of ragey panic. He told me that the slow progress we were making on Mallory was unacceptable. Reader, I would have loved to have finished Mallory long before he said this. I recognize that he didn't want to spend a huge amount of money on a character, and I myself wanted to move on because Mallory was honestly pretty dull. But I maintain that we were doing fruitful work, and it was up to him to recognize what we were achieving, or attempting to achieve. He worked with my assistant on his world building for a little while. My assistant kept me updated about their progress, and it turned out that TBOATI temporarily decided to have some connection with Earth so that his world could inherit big portions of culture from it. The idea disappeared without a trace in just a few sessions. And TBOATI never directly told me about it, so I do think he ultimately wanted an alien culture, not an Earthian one. Yeah, and he also wants somebody else to sit down and write it for him. He doesn't want a writing coach, he wants a ghostwriter. That's what he's saying. I'll add one more thing about Mallory, and then I will move on. TBOATI's lack of self-awareness impacted Mallory's qualities as a character. TBOATI's remit for me was that Mallory was a typical working/lower middle class background. Like I said before, Mallory was an insert of TBOATI. He never told me so, but it became pretty obvious that Mallory was TBOATI because TBOATI told me that he was intelligent and wanted me to portray him as nice. Oh, that's TBOATI in 2 words, intelligent and nice. It's opposite day. About that niceness. TBOATI had told me before and shown in one of his stories that the working classes were generally bad-tempered due to crappy living conditions and their history of being selectively bred as workaholics by the aliens, because they were worked as hard as possible and had precious little in the way of resources to relax and recharge, personal space, nutrition, relaxation, and so on. They were just generally kinda shitty to each other. I started working with TBOATI on Mallory's backstory, and the assumption that he would be kind of a douche, but TBOATI stopped me and told me that Mallory would be nicer than others of his race. I asked how that could be if he was typical, but TBOATI just wasn't sure. He eventually decided that Mallory's parents were probably nicer than the average citizen, so they taught him nicer habits, which actually raised more questions than it solved. But I think this problem, plus the amount of culture that we had to go through to figure Mallory out, put him off finishing the character. To this day, Mallory languishes unfinished in my archive folder. Probably for the best, honestly. Nobody wants to read about this trash. The next issue with TBOATI's world building came to light when he showed me an outline for the full story that he was planning. Oh boy. One part relied on Mallory turning up to the local pirate community and doing a deal with its leader. The leader was meant to be like a hard-bitten sort, pretty much what you'd expect of the leader of a sizable organization of smugglers. This leader was supposed to be doing Mallory a favor, but also be a real hard-ass, so he wanted something in return. I expressed an interest in this pirate leader, and said he must have a fascinating life. TBOATI didn't seem to appreciate my interest, and told me the leader was a bad man, the type of person who would exploit others for his personal gain. I didn't mention the leader again after that. But I got the impression that TBOATI wanted only his character and maybe the girlfriend that he gets mid-story to be interesting to me. While he didn't outwardly say so, I got a definite whiff from TBOATI of, why do all girls like bad boys instead of the nice guys? Oh boy. See, it could have made the pirate leader like somebody who tried to overcome their circumstances by doing this, but actually they have a heart of gold, right? That might be actually kind of interesting, but it's much easier to just make him a cardboard cutout, be like, he's just a bad guy. Okay, cool. You can't even do that with actual bad guys. They need a reason, bro. Ugh. Just for the record, I would read the hell out of a spin-off about this pirate. Yes! And how he kept control of his smuggling operation, which was meant to be pretty damn big, with dozens to hundreds of vendors and probably tens of thousands of customers any day of the week. If I'm being honest, he interested me much more than Mallory. I'm not saying for a second that I thought the pirate leader was peaches and cream. I wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alleyway, but I was fascinated to know how he retained power in such a powder keg of culture, full of angry people, barely able to restrain their various resentments towards life and each other. There was surely no way he could maintain power just by waving a gun around, so he had to have other strategies, and they had to work. But unfortunately, OP is putting way more thought into this character than TBOATI ever did. But I digress. Like I said before, this was TBOATI's project, not mine. I didn't raise my interest in the Smuggler King again, since he was paying me to be interested in Mallory. I'd given him my personal feedback on who I actually thought was interesting, but he didn't pick up what I was putting down. I need to go back to Mallory and his role in this story. Not only was he nice, but he also got special powers. When he first got them, they took a while to settle in, and TBOATI's initial line on this was that Mallory starts having seizures, but doesn't think anything of them. Oh, God. What? I question this, as most people would be deeply worried if they started having seizures out of the blue. He agreed that was true and changed the story. But I swear he thought Mallory would be indifferent because TBOATI himself knew what was going on. Never mind that Mallory would be working his way through the story without the benefit of genre savviness. That is so ridiculous, dude. Well, I had a seizure, no problem. Just get up, go about my day. Oh, wow. Anyway, Mallory's powers. He becomes super intelligent and develops excellent mental stamina so that he's not tired after a day's work, which conveniently allowed him to do extra stuff after his working day was done instead of just wanting to rest. He also spontaneously recovered from the lifetime of trauma that a character in his position would doubtless have been through, so he became calm and confident. Mallory used his extra mental stamina to invent a machine. What could this machine do? Well, it allowed him to use his brain power to control computers. Oh, and did I mention, the state Mallory lived in depended very heavily indeed on computers. Which of the 7 deadly sins can you tie to a computer? Sloth, I guess. Aside from that, Mallory suspected he might develop other powers and made his machine gather data every time he used it to help him work out what those extra powers might be. He also managed to make this machine capable of wiping the short-term memory of anyone that he touched. What the hell? He's just gonna go full Superman. He's gonna be like, oh, computer discovered I have frost breath and heat vision. Oh, and I can fly. All of that had the potential to flatline the story. A non-traumatized individual with the mental processing power to think up effective and efficient solutions to most problems, and any problem he couldn't solve, he could just tech his way out of, or make guards and soldiers forget that he was ever there. Really, reader, where was the challenge? I tried pointing all of this out to TBOATI, but he didn't particularly like the idea that maybe Mallory shouldn't have all these strengths. It might have been different if he'd told me something like,
Oh no, you misunderstand me. Mallory over-relies on his machine and gets into a situation where he can't use it and has to find another way. Or his intelligence is tailored to the job, but he's a specialist in X field, so he becomes unstuck outside of that area.
or even if he'd had the awareness that Mallory's lack of trauma might make it hard for him to relate to other people anymore, but no. TBOATI didn't seem to have any such plans. God, dude, if the story ever gets finished, you know it's going to be awful. It's got a plot like a sixth grader wrote it. Jesus. Except the adult material, which I guess we'll get into. And then there's the adult material. Foot, meat, mouth. TBOATI told me that with the world being as grim as it was, one of the few pleasures available to all classes was easily available porn, and lots of it. Hentai, specifically. When he told me this, I pointed out that hentai was specifically Japanese, and that Japan didn't exist in his world, so that raised the issue of where hentai could possibly come from. He told me that the artists of his world had just happened to come up with a similar style independently of Earth, which seemed a tad convenient to me. But again, if he wanted anime titty and kitty in his world, I wasn't gonna get anywhere fighting that. Oh boy. You could have just said like naked cartoons. That's a natural evolution, isn't it? But specifically, he wants it to be this. All right, whatever, dude. Personally, I thought the idea came off as very neckbeardy, and I wondered whether that would have a positive or negative effect on the popularity of the end product, which TBOATI wants to be a global smash hit. This is never gonna happen. Dream big, buddy. By this time, I pretty much had a policy of mentioning my concerns once, and then I let him take our creative journey wherever he wanted, for better or for worse. I may not like the idea very much, but it doesn't mean that it won't work in the end. I get that a city with a large number of poor would indeed have a seedy side, but I could see hentai turning his whole project into a complete cesspit. I mean, maybe that's the market for it, you know? If that's the way that he gets ahead, then whatever, bro. Success is success, I guess. I'll lurk on the seedier side of YouTube. Don't hold that against me. Again, he can do that if he wants, but he always seemed to want an interesting, unique world. Perhaps his idea of unique and interesting was just a few surface level ideas, but I could see so much more that we could do with this world, and that it could become intriguing and full of lore if he wanted to make it that way. Reader, do you remember me mentioning that there were 7 superstates in this world? There was actually an 8th location, and this one was an underground refuge. It accepted refugees from all 7 deadly sin states, and the aliens controlled knowledge of it carefully to make sure that it got a steady stream of new refugees, but also remained as secret as possible. So wait, I thought the aliens were the bad guys, but they're helping people take refuge? What is this? I'm already confused. TBOATI loved the idea of this refuge, and talked about it often during our working time, even though we technically didn't do that much actual work on it. He mentioned it to me between sessions quite often too, and after a while I had to point out that discussing his project was work, so I needed him to wait until our next session, no matter how fun it was, at least for him. Handling his reaction to this was exhausting in and of itself. Whenever I said, no, I'm not prepared to do that because you haven't paid for it, or I need you to stop now, he'd go into this childlike shame state where I couldn't help but imagine his lip quivering as he typed, and it was always, I feel like I've done something wrong, or are you angry at me? Big sigh. But anyway, the secret 8th state. One detail he was very keen on was that everyone who went there completely healed emotionally from all the pain and hardship that they'd been through, and almost inevitably became very sexually liberated. There would be sex parties where everybody celebrated their freedom by smashing their genitals together. I told him that I had doubts that the majority would do that. It was obvious that most of the deadly sin states were hotspots for sexual exploitation, especially if he wanted to keep his story grimdark. Lust was an obvious state for that, but who would want to be a female civilian encountered by one of Wrath's military? What would happen to vulnerable people under the power of someone with malignant kinks and greed? Indeed, what would be expected of sex workers in envy? That kind of abuse doesn't just melt away because a person gets admitted to a safe environment. Take it from someone who's friends with a social worker. Even with years and years of the best help, I suspected that many of the people who got to that secret state would never become party animals. My best guess was that a good number of them would be quietly relieved to never be forced to have sex again, and my social worker friend agrees with this sentiment. In short, my best guess was that this sexual utopia would come off as false to many people, especially women reading the finished story, which I don't think is what TBOATI was aiming for. Or maybe it makes more sense to say I didn't think that he was really interested in thinking about how women might feel about such a sexualized premise, and he just hoped that we'd all love it and become part of the audience for the story when he made it public. But honestly, it just had too much of an all paths lead to sex vibe about it. I told him what my doubts were, but that wasn't the answer that he wanted to hear. I can't find the conversation where we talked about this, but it was clear that he would not listen to me about this, so I just left it alone, despite my misgivings. I know world building done by a sexually frustrated writer when I see it. And I decided that it wasn't worth dying on this particular hill. Ah, see, you're learning, OP. Used to be OP would try and press, but now she's like, whatever, bro. Keep paying me, do whatever you want. Just in case I seem biased when I say I think women would find this whole story off, I should mention the girlfriend that Mallory gets. One day, after ascending this Zen-like tech genius figure, he bumps into a creature from that elf people species I talked about a few parts back. And wouldn't you know it, she's young and female. God damn it, dude. Yep. It's like he just has a checklist of all the tropes. And he's like, yep, there, that one, next. Got to check all the boxes. Let's call her Rebecca. Rebecca grew up in one of the other super states, but was kidnapped to this one, where she spent a while as a slave. At some point, she went through the same process as Mallory, where she got superpowers, and her powers were super speed and empathy. TBOATI made sure I knew that empathy was her primary superpower. He didn't seem too interested in the super speed, funnily enough. She escaped and went on the run, not an enviable situation for somebody who looks fundamentally different from the rest of the population. Now, rightly or wrongly, the way I read this empathy superpower was that she was either so submissive that she empathized as a survival strategy, because many abusees do this in real life, and Rebecca's life is hanging by a thread at this point, so she probably doesn't dare to be anything other than a tonic to be around. She spontaneously overcame her trauma, which, knowing TBOATI, wouldn't have been handled well anyways. The trauma that everyone would be going through in this kind of story would make for good storytelling in itself, but I don't think he particularly understands what overcoming trauma means, nor the journey that involves, nor the imperfect quality of most people's recovery from said trauma. Or maybe she was never traumatized too much in the first place, so she's able to empathize from a place of a lack of trauma, in which case, why run away in the first place? Mallory takes her to his home, and they talk all evening. They have a good connection. He goes to work the next day, leaving Rebecca in his home. She looks around to familiarize herself with what a home belonging to a member of his species is like, and finds his porn stash. God. Yeah, boy, here we go. TBOATI told me this leads to
imaginable consequences.
I didn't ask exactly what he meant, but knowing by how he likes to wedge sex into his story, I suggested that whatever he was imagining was probably unrealistic, because I don't think he and I were thinking the same things here. Let's be real. Chances are Rebecca had been raped many times by the time this story happens, and Quite likely, power imbalances have featured as part of that abuse. She's young, exotic, isolated from her own kind, and powerless, and she most certainly recognizes the extremely fragile position that she's in. My best guess would be that she'd take a mental note of whether there was any content of elf people, which might make it more likely that Mallory might sexualize her, and of any potentially harmful themes. Was there any content of trapped, hurt, humiliated, or other compromised women? After that, I'd guess she'd go out of her way to avoid associating that material with herself, maybe always being fully dressed, never having wet hair, etc. Wet hair? I don't get that one. Is that what does it for some guys? If you like wet hair, leave a comment. She would reach out to communities of other members of her species, ideally free members of her species, and she'd decide on an escape route that she'd always been able to reach. She'd likely also sleep with one eye open or reverse her sleep pattern so that she slept while he was at work. In short, I firmly believe that Rebecca's sexuality would have been too badly damaged for her to enjoy anything about finding Mallory's porn stash. When I told TBOATI that I thought it would be a poor fit, he said,
I'll see about that.
Which in itself meant very little. I'm also aware of how the situation set things up for Mallory to have a chance with Rebecca without having to risk the potential shame of her judgment. He doesn't have to tell her what his fetishes are because she's already learned them while he wasn't even there. Her power is empathy, which probably makes it hard for her to shame other people because she feels particularly keenly whatever they feel. To look at it one way, her superpowers, both of them, are ones that make her harmless, not dangerous. I don't know, man. Super speed seems dangerous as hell. Make you spontaneously combust, flick a pebble at your junk in light speed. That's gonna come off like a bullet. Pow!
But she would never use them that way because she's too empathetic.
God. That is, unless TBOATI took her in a totally badass direction and had her weaponize her empathy. Can you imagine, reader? Rebecca could use her empathy to practically mind read others about their interests, fears, secret shames, etc., and leverage those. She could work out how to be the most effective enabler for people, because empathy and enablement are so closely related, and put people in compromising positions before making her escape. For such a soft skill, empathy really could be an incredible power. And yet, TBOATI's entire story looked so much like a teenage boy's wank fantasy that I don't think we'll ever end up seeing that. There's just one more thing that I want to talk about in this part, and then we'll be done. TBOATI's creativity often stopped at naming things. We got talking about town and city names for one of his superstates, and he spent a few hours with Jay to come up with some names. A few days later, he booked a consultation with me. I started the session by asking him what he wanted to use the time for. He showed me the list and said,
Are these good names?
Now, I stand by my customers' right to use their time with me however they like, but I had to question this since just going ahead and giving my subjective opinion about these names seemed like poor value for money. I was honest and said, a name is neither good nor bad, it just is. Are you sure that you want to spend 50 pounds to have me go down this list of names and give you my subjective opinion that will, after all, be just one person's opinion, or would you prefer to have us do some world building? He accepted that this was a good point, and we worked on world building, but again, we did have to tackle the obligatory few minutes of crippling shame from him. Hoo-wee, TLDR. I'm learning a whole heck of a lot just by reading this, man. OP has some great insights and stuff like that. I might try writing my own little story pretty soon here, and I guarantee you whatever first draft I crap out onto Reddit is probably going to be significantly more readable than whatever TBOATI has spent years constructing here. Not to take shots because, you know, this is his life's work, but come on, man. There's so much that is missing or lacking or just incomplete trouble here that I don't think this book or whatever book series will ever make it to market. And if it does, it is going to flop so horribly And then, of course, dude's gonna get all defensive and be like, oh, well, people just don't get it. No, bro, you're the one that doesn't get it. Just a little bit of depth for your characters. I wrote a good guy, he's a good guy. I wrote a bad guy, he's a bad guy. Good guy gets a girlfriend and defeats the bad guy. Want to read my super interesting and original story? No, bro. You think I'm gonna waste my time with this? God. Luckily, OP's getting paid to sit through this crap, but I could not do it. Physically, I just could not do it. I would have 1 or 2 sessions with this dude, and I'd be like, you know what? The money's not worth it. I can't rebuy my mental sanity, okay? I'd much rather work with a writer that has an actual future. Not to seem overly cold or something, but you think this is ever going to go on a resume? I helped write the 7 Superstates with Mallory story. No, people are going to be like, what the hell is that? Or if they have read it by some freaking miracle, they're going to be like, yeah, that story was horrible. You helped write that? It's horrible. Nope, pick up, move on. Although, sitting here describing the entire scenario, OP has managed to make me think that it might be worth it. I mean, I would like some writing coaching, I think. If you'd like to hit her up, she's actually in my Discord server as the character consultancy, so feel free to drop on by, drop her a line if you would like some help with writing. And as always, I hope that you will like, comment, and or subscribe if you did enjoy this story. Yay! I hope you share it around, you know, get the word out about ReddX. Oh, I'm so satisfied with how fast this channel is growing, man. We hit 7,000 subs like last week, and we're already like 7,500 almost. Wow. Thank you guys so much for getting the word out. I also hope you check out the links in the description. Darkly Studios did the animations for this video, the little character you see, and you can hit him up on Twitter if you got anything that needs animating. Super good guy, super fast, super professional. I plug him all the time because I love him. We've also got Wifey's channel, Mr. and Mrs. ReddX, Teespring if you're trying to rock the merch, my personal subreddit, r/ReddXReads, and my Amazon affiliate link, which currently goes to my microphone. But if you click that link and buy anything else on Amazon, then it'll kick me a few bucks, which is pretty cool. We've also got social medias. I mentioned the Discord, but there's also Twitter and Facebook. Oh, and my gorgeous, wonderful, beautiful, generous patrons. How could I forget? I would like to thank them all, but especially ZeroMMX, Lady Nix, Robert Waits, Cider Drinker, Tato Fair at the Last Shinobi, Mark 211, Michael Undead, Mitch, John Hero, Candy Sora, Little Lone Wolf, Miss Monday, Silent Revolver, JM Coon, Leon Embers, TSM Kirby, Redwin, Synaptic Boomstick, Jerry, Staples, Yeet, Cake Jerry, that's a different Jerry. That one, Nick, Tamago, and that big tasty jelly donut. Thank you guys so much for supporting, helping me to power through when things do get demonetized. I think this story will be relatively safe. Doesn't say too many bad words, but it does happen from time to time. Obviously, if you can help them support, that is massively appreciated. But if you can't right now, don't sweat it too hard, friends. I just appreciate you coming on through, hanging out with me, and I hope that you come on back and hang out with me again tomorrow, because really, the views is how my beard stays so buttered. In order to do so, you need to keep yourself safe out there, wash your hands, but also take some time out and do something that you personally enjoy today. If you haven't watched the first part of this saga, go ahead. If you haven't seen some of the other sagas, ooh, we got like 2-3 hour long videos for you, just waiting, just thirsting for your views. But most importantly, always remember, friends, that you are loved, you are worthy, and you definitely deserve it. I will see you in the next one. And until then, bye-bye.